Good evening, everybody. Is the sound okay? Everyone can hear? Just someone type in the chat box if you can hear me. Good? All right. Very good. All right. I had two questions this week, or two requests. Actually, one was from a couple of weeks ago. But two requests to discuss. And I'm going to try and do both of them at the same time. One request was, excuse me, one request was the concept of merging the soul and the body. How does this advance us collectively and individually? And the second question was to do with the divine names. Since the Sfirot, the 10 emanations, each is associated with a name, aren't we thereby, instead of focusing on the unity of God, are we not thereby focusing on a multiplicity of gods? God forbid. In other words, 10 instead of 1. In fact, there was one of the Kabbalists, one of the sages complained against the Kabbalists that instead of one God, they now have 10 because of the 10 Sfirot. Now, this view is obviously mistaken, doesn't understand. Yeah, it's recording already, Terry. Thank you for pointing it out. It is recording. This is a mistaken view for obvious reasons. And we will show how it's mistaken, and in so doing, I think we'll explain the concept of the merging the soul and body. Let's begin with, first of all, understanding what essentially is a soul. What do we mean when we say a person's soul? It's not such an easy concept to define, presumably, but we will come to an understanding what that is. And how does it differ from the explanation of what an angel is? What's the difference between souls, and particularly souls in bodies, and angels? What's the difference between them? One of the differences is explained, or the general difference is explained by somebody named the Kotzker Rebbe. The rabbi, the grand rabbi of Kotsk, Menachem Mendel of Kotsk was his name. Kotsk was a city, I believe, in Poland. He said that he was accustomed to saying some very sort of pithy and witty expressions, and not just to make jokes, but to sum up things in a way that people could remember them easily, and would make the proper impression on their understanding. So I said like this: the difference between angels and souls is that each of them has an advantage and a disadvantage. The advantage of angels is that they can't fall. The disadvantage of angels is they can't rise. Now, let me just go back to they can't fall. Certainly in Jewish theology, angels don't fall. Angels are merely messengers. They cannot go outside of the parameters of their message, of their mission. Angels are there only as a mission. They have each angel has a mission. Some of them have the same mission all the time. It doesn't change. And those are the constant angels like Gabriel and Michael and so on, Gabriel, Michael, Raphael, the angel of healing, and so on and so forth. Each of them has a task which is never finished. It's a mission which doesn't end. and therefore they are constantly there. They're constantly in existence. Whereas other angels, for instance, the angels that came to Abraham at the time of after his circumcision and just before the destruction of Sodom, of the city of Sodom. So the commentators explain that why did three angels come? Well, one came to heal Abraham. One came to tell him that Sarah would become pregnant, would have a baby, and one was there to destroy the city of Sodom. Why couldn't one angel do all three? Because each angel has a specific mission, and it has only that mission. So angels are limited. They have an advantage in that they can't fall. They have a disadvantage, they can't rise. They can't get beyond what they are. Now, I'll explain that in greater detail a little bit later. But to continue with this expression, this statement of Rabbi Menachem Mendel of Kotsk, angels have a disadvantage, they can't rise. They have an advantage, they can't fall. The souls, human beings, also have an advantage and a disadvantage. The advantage of human beings is that they can rise. The disadvantage is that they can fall. In other words, a human being is a mobile creature. He has potential to move, but the move could be, unfortunately, down instead of up. Right? He could improve or he could regress. That is the unfortunate reality as regards human beings. So, having discussed that sort of just very, very briefly, let's go into it in much more detail. In order to be able to explain it in more detail and understand it in greater depth, we have to preface first an explanation of the idea of divine names. Now, we've discussed this many times before, and I'm just going to go through it briefly. Instead of doing it at length, I'm going to just do it briefly. Every name that we find throughout biblical literature called Tanakh, all the names that we find in Tanakh stands for Torah, Nevi'im, Ketuvim. Torah, the 5 books of Moses, Nevi'im, the writings of the prophets, and Ketuvim, the writings of those who had Ruach HaKodesh, they had divine inspiration, but were not necessarily prophets. For example, the book of Ruth, the book of Esther, the book of Psalms, the Song of Songs, and so on. Those are called Ketuvim. The book of Job, of Eov, those are called Ketuvim. In any event, right throughout Tanakh, we find different names for God. What do these different names signify? In fact, at the burning bush, Moses himself asked this question to God. God told him to go to Egypt on a mission to take the Jewish people out of slavery, out of bondage in Egypt. And Moses was very reluctant to do this, not because he didn't, not because he was lazy. Not that wasn't the reason, but he was very humble and he didn't think that he was worthy of such a huge and important mission. So Moses was he was reluctant, but God prevailed upon him to do what it is that he was obligated to do. And so he did in fact go on this mission. But before he went on the mission, he said to God, I have to know what to tell the sages. They're going to ask me. Let me just get the chat up in case anyone's asking questions over here. There we go. Good. He asked God, well, who shall I say sent me? Because there was a tradition handed down from the time of Abraham already that when God took the Jewish people out of Egypt, he would do so with a certain name. In other words, there was a name that was not known generally, was only known to the sages. So Moses is asking God, what name, who shall I say sent me? In other words, what name is going to be used in taking the Jewish people out of Egypt. But God didn't answer him specifically, according to the Midrash. The Midrash says God answered him first more generally. More generally, the answer he gave him was, Lefi ma'asai ani ekra, according to my deeds, I am called. In other words, each name is a particular type or a category of activity, a particular type of activity. So therefore you have the name Kale, for example, Aleph Lamed, which is associated with activities of chesed, of kindness. The name Elokim is associated with activities of self-limitation, God's self-limitation. His appearance to prophets and to angels and so on is very often through the name Elokim. The name Elokim is the gematria, the numerical value of the word Hateva, nature. So God appearing in nature, God appearing in time and space. In other words, as the master of time and space, as the one who arranges and creates time and space. That is the name Elokim, the creation of time and space. The whole creation begins with the 10 utterances which start with the sentence, Vayomer Elokim. God said, using the name Elokim. So the name Elokim is associated with creation, is associated with the physical world, associated with nature, and so on and so forth. And so on we go with all of the 10 Sfirot have names attached to them. There is another name, a name which is called a transcendent name, which is the name Yud He Vav He, Yud Ke Vav Ke, or as we call it in brief, Havaya. Or I suppose in English they translate it usually as Jehovah, which I don't know where the J comes from, but anyway, it's that's the way it's, for those who don't recognize it, that's where it would be. That's what it would be translated as. So, Havaya. Now, what does Havaya mean? There are several explanations of what it means, but none of them is actually captures entirely what this name means. Why? Because it's essentially a transcendent name. It's a name that transcends creation. One of the ways of explaining it is, perhaps I could do this on a share screen. Let me just share a screen, a whiteboard for a minute, and I will show you what I mean. Here we go. Okay, let's go texts, and we'll go Hebrew first. All right. All right, so the name is Yud Hey Vav Hey. Right, that's the way it would be written. Can you see it? Oh man, this whiteboard is not meant for Hebrew for some reason. It just never ever gets Hebrew right. All right, let me just write that again. All right, now let's try it again. Went into caps lock. Okay, that's the wrong thing. Okay, there you go. And again, it did the same thing. All right, there's supposed to be a hey on the end here. Let me just draw it in. All right, there's another hey on the end over here. Should have started off like this, would have been easier. Okay, so Yud K Vav K. Now, or if you would be writing it in English, I guess it would be that's really how I guess it would translate it into English. UK. All right, whatever. But the interesting thing about it is that according to one explanation, This is a composite of haya, the word haya in Hebrew, right? Haya. Haya is the past tense, right? It's the word that means the past tense. It was. Haya, hoveh. Hoveh is in the present tense. Again, writing with a mouse is not one of my fortes. That's hoveh and yihyeh. Yud, hey, yud, hey. Right? Haya, hoveh, v'yihyeh. Past, present, and future. So past, present, and future all at once. If past, present, and future all at once, that's not the right thing to do. Past, present, and future all at once is obviously something that is not possible in this world. Right? Time is sequential, and obviously past, present, and future cannot come at once. But because God transcends time, therefore He was, always was, He always is in the present, and always will be in the future. Right? Haya Hoveh, He's all, and that's what the word Havaya, according to one explanation, means. But essentially, it's a name without. Essentially, it's a name without meaning. It is. It transcends meaning. It's something that we can't grasp with the human mind. Okay. Now, what's important here is that the name Elokim, which I mentioned before, which again would be Aleph, Lamed. Now, usually it would be written as a Hey, but since we don't write God's name in vain, right? So we write with a Kuf instead, right? Elokim, the name Elokim and the name Havaya are two different activities. The name Elokim is the activity within nature, and the name Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, Havaya, is the activity that transcends nature. It's who God is rather than what He does. Let's put it that way. It's who God is rather than what He does. So, to answer the question about the 10 names that are associated with the 10 Sfirot, and are we praying to the Sfirot when we pray to God using that particular name, the answer is no. Just like we would say there's a prayer that we're saying during these days, everyone says it during these days, between the days of the Jewish New Year, Rosh Hashanah, and Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. So we say a prayer every day, which begins with the words, Avinu Malkeinu. Right? Avinu Malkeinu, our Father, our King. Talking about God. Now, what are those two concepts? One concept here is the idea of God is our Father. Avinu is our Father. On the other hand, He's Malkeinu, He is our King, and we are simply His subjects. Both of those things are true, and when we address God as Avinu, our Father, or we address Him as Malkeinu, our King, or our Master, if you would like, that does not mean that we're praying to those names. We're just addressing God in the particular role in which He, in one or both of those roles, which form those relationships: the relationship of a father to a son, and the relationship of a king to a subject. So, because we talk about God as our Father, we put ourselves in the position of sons. We are His children, not only sons but daughters as well. Obviously, the children. Avinu is the father of the children. Malkeinu is the king of the subjects. Now, obviously, however we address, similarly, however we would address a person, we're not addressing the name per se. We're addressing the person who has that relationship by which we call that name. For instance, if you would be speaking to someone out of a sign of respect, you would call them sir, right? Or madam. You go to the store and the clerk says to you, would you like credit or cash, sir? Right? Whatever, right? That kind of thing. So, similarly, when we're talking to God, we address him in the appropriate way. The appropriate way might be the name Yud Kei Vav Kei. The appropriate way might be the name Elokim. But we're talking only about God. We're not talking about the Sfirot. It's just that a certain relationship is captured by or described by a particular Sfirah. So, for instance, the relationship of mother, just to give an example, is captured by the Sfirah called Bina. And there's a verse that explains that Eim Habanim Smecha, the mother of children, is rejoicing. The mother of children rejoices. Right? Eim Habanim Smecha. That is the Sfirah of Bina. The Sfirah of Chochmah is called Abba. Right? Abba. The Sfirot have these, they have names, they also have relationship names. Abba and Ima, father and mother, and so on. Why? Because that's the Abba is the progenitor. Ima is the one that cultivates and causes the child to grow and bring it up and so on and so forth. So these are relationships. And our relationships to God have similar relationships similar to the way they are in the human sphere as well. And that's why we call them those particular names. So that answers that question. Now, in order to be able to understand the merging of the soul and the body, we need to understand, therefore, what the origin of the soul is, as opposed to the origin of the body. The origin of the body is from the name Elokim, as the angels are from the name Elokim. In fact, the angels are called very often in Tanakh, in Scripture. The angels are actually called Elokim or Bnei Elokim. There's many psukim, many verses that use the name Elokim for when it means an angel. Why is that the case? Because the shlichus, the mission which that particular angel has, is a limited and very specific mission, and therefore it comes from the name Elokim. And that is why angels cannot rise and they cannot fall, because they come from the name which shows the idea of limitation. Similarly, the body is also related to the physical body is also related to the concept of Elokim. Whereas the soul is related to the name Yud Kei Vav Kei, Havaya, the transcendent aspect. Now, in creation, you don't find in creation that the name Havaya, that this name, the transcendent name, is used until man is created. Bayom Asos Havaya Elokim, it's only at the end of creation does the name Havaya appear. Why? Because man has been created. In other words, the soul essentially is that aspect of God which is transcendent, and it's placed into a body which is limited. So, what is the purpose of that? Well, the purpose of that is that there should be a possibility of the revelation of godliness in this world. How does the revelation of godliness in this world come about? It comes about as a result of the infinite soul, which is now placed into a finite body. The infinite soul, this piece of God, the Tanya, the famous Hasidic work by Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, calls the soul Chelek Elokah Mima'al Mamash. It's a verse actually, right? Chelek Elokah Mima'al. It's part of God above. But it becomes mamash. Chelek Elokah Mima'al Mamash. It becomes limited within. It's not limited within the body. It becomes attached to the body in order to fulfill a certain mission. We'll discuss that in a minute. Let me just see this question. The name we have as children creates our character with God. Yes, that could be. Again, the Tanya speaks about in Shar HaYichud VaEmunah, one of the gates, the section of Tanya which is called the gate of unity and faith. In other words, a section called Unity and Faith. Shar HaYichud VaEmunah. So, it's the second part of Tanya. Very, very important section. Okay, so it says over there in Tanya that the name that we are called and name that we were given is a handle to our life force, which is why name analysis often reveals things about a person that that he wasn't aware of, or he or she wasn't aware of. As some of you who are listening now are aware, I've done name analysis for you, and you find your name in the first letters of consecutive words of a verse, or in the last letters of consecutive words in a verse, and that is a clue as to what you're all about, what your essence is all about. In other words, what your root is, what your source is in the Torah, what your mission is in life. Okay, so that is the idea of the name of Yud Kei Vav Kei, the transcendent name. So when these two things come together, when the transcendent aspect, in other words, the divine soul, the soul which comes from God, which is part of God above, comes into a body, what is the purpose of that? What are we doing here? What's the whole point? Very interesting thing that if you read the works of Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, again the author of the Tanya, and many, many other works. So he has another work which discusses the various portions of Torah readings, a work which is called, there's actually two parts to it. One is called Torah Or, another one's called Likutei Torah. So both of these together are very, very seminal works in Hasidic thought. And in almost every discourse, somewhere in the discourse, he asks this question: what is the soul doing down here? What did we come down here for? What on earth is it that we're doing? Why are we here? And because the question is a perennial question for him, he asks it on almost every occasion. Sorry, let's switch that off quickly. Okay, there we go. So, now, what is the purpose of the soul descending down into this world then? Well, the purpose of the soul descending into the physical world is in order to bring that aspect of infinity into the world, to bring the infinite into the finite. Is that a paradox? Of course it's a paradox. That's paradoxical. For sure it's paradoxical, but that's what the purpose is. The purpose is to bring the infinite within the finite. Who can do that? Only God can do that. Right? How does he do it? He does it through giving us a soul, and that soul has the ability to bring infinite revelation into the world. For Jewish philosophers and in Jewish theology, what does that mean? That means to fulfill the dictates of the Torah, of the Bible, to fulfill the mitzvot, the commandments, the 613 commandments, to fulfill them completely in the best way possible. Whichever ones are possible to do in our age, we can only do far less than 613 because many of them have to do with the temple and so on. Some of them have to do with the mitzvahs of the king or the mitzvahs of the Kohen, the high priest, and so on and so forth. So we can't do those, but we do them as a whole, right? Because he does them, we take a part in that as well. Of course, today we don't have the temple, and we don't have the high priest, and we don't have a king, and therefore those mitzvot are sort of in abeyance. But the ones that we could do still bring about infinite revelation to the world. We don't see it, we're not aware of it, but in the future we will see it in the time to come, in the Messianic era. In the time of the resurrection of the dead, that will all become evident, that will all become revealed. But the purpose, therefore, of merging the soul and the body is in order to bring the physical world, the lowest of all worlds, the world of Asiya, and the lowest aspect of the world of Asiya, this physical world, into revelation. In other words, to bring that infinite revelation into the finite world, so that the finite can also have a taste of, so to speak, the infinite, and that's what elevates the world and lifts it up to a higher level. So the purpose, therefore, of merging the soul and body was in order to advance us all to a higher spiritual level, not to wander off into the Garden of Eden, so to speak, and live completely in spirituality. No, the purpose is to elevate physicality, to make the physical world experience the infinite wisdom, the infinite presence of God. Of course, that works individually and collectively. A person who experiences this and who is aware of it and who has complete awareness of the godliness within him, in other words, he's focused entirely on his divine soul and doesn't let any of the limitations of the animal soul, the animal aspect of us in the physical body, take any hold over that. Someone who's completely vanquished that animal aspect of himself, in other words, the natural world, is called a tzaddik. That's called someone who's a righteous, a saintly person, a transcendent person. Someone who's trying to do it but may not be succeeding completely is sort of in the middle. And then you have a wicked person who's completely under his, ruled by his negative impulses and so on. But everyone, no matter how far away they may be, has the possibility of turning around and elevating and repairing any damage that was done previously and elevating everything up to the very highest levels. Just to finish off with a thing that someone sent me today, a very beautiful saying by the great Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Berditchev, who was known as someone with tremendous, tremendous love for other people. He was just a very, very saintly person, and he was characterized by a tremendous, tremendous passion for singing the praises of other people. So this year, the Day of Atonement falls out on the Sabbath. And it's not the first time it's ever happened, obviously. And the story goes, this is what someone sent me today, that Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Berditchev, when the Day of Atonement would fall out on the Sabbath, he would be very, very relaxed. And he said like this: as everybody knows, writing on the Sabbath we don't do. We don't write on the Sabbath. It's one of the 39 categories of work which we're not allowed to do on the Sabbath, which Jews don't do on the Sabbath, or they shouldn't do. And one can only write in an absolute emergency. In other words, if it was a doctor and he has to write a prescription to save somebody's life, that he can do. But just writing on the Sabbath you don't do. Cessation of work, complete cessation of all types of work, including even something like writing. So Since on Yom Kippur, on the Day of Atonement, that's the day on which the edict for the year is signed and sealed. So said Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Berditchev, the Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, which falls out on the Sabbath, on Shabbos, just as we can't write, God also can't write. What he keeps what he says in his Torah, what he tells us to do, he also does. So he won't write either. The only time you can write on the Sabbath is in order to save a life. Saving a life means signing a decree of life, not a decree of death. Therefore, he was very relaxed when it came to this day that came out on the Sabbath, because he said that everyone is going to have a fantastic year. It's going to be a great year, and it'll be a year of life and a year of light and a year of happiness and a year of only good things. So I wish you all a great week and a great year. It was just the Jewish New Year. And may you all have a life of light and happiness and fulfillment. And may we all come to a true recognition of the godliness of our souls and act accordingly. There will not be a class for the next 2 weeks, as I will be away. I'm going away to visit my kids in Florida and then in New York. And so I will let you know when I get back, and we'll be able to have a class again then. Alrighty, have a good one, and see you next time around. Oh, are there any questions?